Good morning and welcome again to Coffee with Mr. V. Last episode I did short run Phillips curve. So today I want to go on and do the long run Phillips curve. A couple of health warnings. First of all, as it stands on the Edexcel A-level specification, you do not need this. Okay, so if you happen to be one of those A-level students watching this and you're thinking, oh my God, I didn't get taught this in class, that's okay. You don't need it. On the other hand, it definitely is in the IB specification, and it is in lots of other A-level specifications. So if you're watching this just to help you with your understanding of economics beyond the A-level, fine. But don't start asking me loads of questions in class about it because you don't need it. Anyway, you know how this works. Go and grab yourself a cup of coffee or whatever your favorite liquid is, put it in a mug, a glass, or a cup, and then come back to me for the synchronized sip. And that is going to be the best part of your day. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. Cheers. I love coffee. So very, very quick recap on the short run Phillips curve. Bill Phillips, if you remember what I said, was writing in the 1960s, plotting basically UK data on unemployment against inflation. He worked out that there was an inverse relationship. And therefore, there was a big conclusion, therefore, that you couldn't have both things at the same time, that it was essentially a trade-off between unemployment and inflation. So you could reduce unemployment to a point, but beyond that point, you would start to see inflation accelerating. And that point was called the natural rate of inflation. And in my last episode, the way I asked you to think about the natural rate of employment was here. It's the point at which all cyclical unemployment has been exhausted. So the only people left in the pool now at this point below the natural rate of unemployment are structurally unemployed people, or structurally, geographically, occupationally, or perhaps even economically inactive people. And in order, therefore, to employ them, you're going to have to pay above market wages. Your average costs are going to go up, your price levels are going to go up, and that's going to push up inflation. One of the other things I said in the lesson in that particular session was that this Phillips curve is very much a vindication of the Keynesian AS model. Now, as you can imagine, lots of classical economists are upset by this because it doesn't vindicate their model. And so this is very much the world according to Mr. V now, but I believe that a lot of kind of classical economists did some work to the Phillips curve, which Bill Phillips, by the way, never ever kind of signed off on. Bill Phillips, unfortunately, died relatively soon after he had done this theory. Okay, and therefore, a lot of what we're going to do in a moment about the long run Phillips curves actually should not be attributed whatsoever to Bill Phillips. Okay, so this is the story as it is according to a classical economist, and it will help us prove the long run Phillips curve. So if you remember what we said at this point here, at the natural rate of unemployment, okay, we can call it point A today. If we increase aggregate demand below the natural rate of unemployment, this is when we start to see inflation accelerating. So let's say inflation is going up from 2% to 4%. Of course, though, people are not stupid. People are rational. Workers are rational. And when they see the price levels going up around them, they will also want to bargain for higher wages. So they will go to their employers, poke them in the chest, saying, you need to pay me more in line with inflation so that my real wage does not decrease. When they do that, that creates what's called a wage price spiral. Because, of course, if I'm asking for wages to increase, then that's going to increase the cost of production to firms, and therefore that's going to push up prices more. So therefore, we actually end up going from A to B and then perhaps even to point C. I'll talk you through that again very quickly, just in case you missed it. So what we're saying is, to employ people below the natural rate of unemployment, you're going to have to pay above market wages. That's the only way that you can incentivize them to work. However, that causes inflation to go up. And when those people see the inflation rate of prices going at the CPI going up as well as their wages, they're going to very quickly realize that their real wage actually hasn't gone up at all. And the only reason they came back into the workforce is because they were getting the higher than average market wages. But if the real wage actually isn't increasing at all, then they're going to go back to their employer and ask for higher than wage increases again, and therefore higher than inflation rate increases. And therefore, wages go up, prices go up, which means wages go up again, which means prices go up again, and you get what's called a wage price spiral. And this is what we're got going on here now from A to B to C. We've got a wage price spiral. Now, this might increase all the way up to, let's say, D, E, F, and we could keep going and we could keep going. All right, that's the problem now that we might have in this economy, that we might get this wage price spiral, which is essentially going on forever. All right, I'm going to write wage price spiral, wage price spiral. But this isn't sustainable forever, okay? There will come a point where prices go up to the point where it is unsustainable for businesses to keep driving those prices higher and higher, because ultimately there'll become a point where consumers stop buying these products, okay? You know, consumers won't buy pens at £10 £10 a pop. So there'll become a point where this is unsustainable for businesses. At that point, then, businesses will have to start laying off workers because they simply won't be able to keep up with those wage increases. Therefore, unemployment will start to increase back this way. Okay, remember, increasing unemployment is when we go to the right on this particular graph because of the way the x-axis is noted. All right, so unemployment will increase. And when unemployment increases, we will come back down the Phillips curve. But, and here is the important but, all right, the important but is that people's expectations of their wage increases has changed. So people are no longer going to be happy going back down to 2% pay increases because their real wage would still be lower. So actually, remembering what we did in the last episode, we said that costs of production have gone up, or they have gone up because wages have gone up. We are now coming back down a higher short-run Phillips curve. It's still the same relationship in the short run. Okay, it's still the negative relationship, but it's just shifted upwards. It's shifted upwards. Okay, and this is the phrase that I want you to use because expectations have changed about pay increases. And instead of then coming back all the way down to point A, we're actually end up coming back down to point D. D is at the natural rate of unemployment. We've come back down to the natural rate of employment, but at a higher inflation level, at 4%. Now, if you stop and think about this, this is now a vindication of the classical school of thought, because we said when aggregate demand increases in the classical school, what will happen is that wages increase, costs of production increase, short-run aggregate supply shifts to the left. We've self-stabilized back at YFE, or back at this natural rate of unemployment, but at a higher price level. So all it has ended up doing, it hasn't created any real GDP growth. It's simply caused inflation. And if you look at this graph now, that's what we've got going on as well. We're still at the NRU, we're still at the natural rate of unemployment, but we have a higher inflation rate. And this is why we can now draw a long run Phillips curve, because in the long run, we're always coming back to the natural rate of unemployment. Now, a couple of things at this point. Bill Phillips did not say any of this stuff, okay? After Bill Phillips published his article on the Phillips curve, the short-run Phillips curve, very sadly, he died shortly afterwards, okay? But what a lot of people did is they took his theory and then advanced it. But if my honest opinion about this is that they advanced it in order to prove their own view of their world, their own paradigm, the classical paradigm. Bill Phillips didn't try, but as far as I'm concerned, Bill Phillips was just noting the fact that he understood that there was a relationship between unemployment and inflation. He didn't use his work to kind of vindicate any one school of economics, but clearly there were a lot of vested interests in this, and people wanted to use the power of the curve. There clearly is a relationship somewhere between unemployment and inflation, and they've used it to justify their own theory, which is this. I think there are some holes in the theory. So, for example, I don't know whether it's true that we necessarily run out of cyclical unemployment at a particular point, and then we go into structural and occupational. But I have come to accept the theory, and this is kind of my plea to you, which is, look, if you get a question on this in an exam, then to some extent you might want to just rote learn this story, a little bit like rote learning the classical and the Keynesian stories as well. The story being then that once we go below the natural rate of unemployment, we have got rid of our cyclical unemployed. To employ anybody else at this point means that we have to pay them above market wages. Fine. This then will create a wage price spiral according to classical economists. Okay, wages go up, prices go up, causing prices to go up, causing wages to go up, etc., etc. This could go on forever. At some point, all right, and you know, at some point, and I suppose hypothetically this is true. At some point, it must be true that businesses can no longer sustain those price rises because demand will simply fall off. People will not be able to afford it, or will be unwilling to pay those sorts of prices for this good. At that point, businesses need to fire people. They need to cut their costs and make people unemployed. It's very likely that it will make those people who just came into the labor force unemployed because they're the ones that are demanding the higher pay increases. But either way, whenever we start to unemploy people, we're not going back down the original Phillips curve because people are no longer ever going to be happy with 2%, not when inflation is so high around them. So when we come back down the Phillips curve, we're coming back down a new higher up Phillips curve. And that's why we come back to point D and not back to point A. And hopefully that all makes sense. As I say, it is a nice piece of theory, and it does work to justify this model. And they go hand in glove, and you can use them to kind of mutually force one or the other. The extent to which any of this, the long run Phillips curve, explains real life, I think, you know, for my money, the jury is out. There are a lot of people, however, that do talk about natural rates of unemployment. So if you look in the literature, there does seem to be quite a lot of people saying that there is a natural rate of unemployment in developed countries like the UK and like the USA of anything between about 4% and 6% unemployment. That doesn't mean you can't ever go below that. Look, we can go below the natural rate of unemployment, but it is to say that it is likely then to cause inflation, and we will come back down to that NRU at some point, albeit at a higher level of inflation. And that's probably where I should finish, because the whole point about the difference between the short run and the long run is that the short run says there is a trade-off between unemployment and inflation. However, the long run Phillips curve says that there isn't. The long run Phillips curve simply says that we will always self-stabilize back at the natural rate of unemployment. A little bit like classical economics says we'll always come back to YFE. We'll always come back to the natural rate of unemployment. So therefore, there is no trade-off. It just means that we can't ever get below that natural rate of unemployment in the long run. Right, I hope that makes sense. Please ask me questions if you are at all confused or worried, or just, you know, you can see holes in the theory that don't quite make sense, and I will try and help you out. All right, thank you for joining, and I will see you again next time.